The Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of Disney's most iconic movies for many reasons, not the least of which is because it stars Quasimodo, a character that represents Disney's first depictions of a person with a disability caused by a birth defect. Now, of course, there are many reasons why the story of The Hunchback of Notre Dame is so well known. It is a story of man and monster, a dichotomous story that appears time and again throughout literature. It is a story that tells us about human nature, yet The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and specifically Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, can tell us also about disability and how people with disabilities are treated. So let's start with Quasimodo's name. In the beginning of the story, Clopin, the narrator, indicates that Frollo gave the baby he finds effectively after killing his mother the name of Quasimodo, meaning half-formed. Technically, Quasimodo doesn't mean half-formed. It comes from the phrase Quasimodo gentili infantis, which means as if a newborn baby. So Quasimodo itself only means as if, or as if just. Quasimodo is the name given to the Sunday after Easter Sunday in the Catholic tradition, the day in which Frollo found Quasimodo outside of the cathedral in the original text. Now, it isn't super likely that it would also be snowing the weekend after Easter in France, but I digress. The reason I point out his name is because names are one of the first things a child learns, to respond to their name. And whether Quasimodo were to mean half-formed or as if just, it begs the question of what does it mean to be born to a name that means you're half-formed, or essentially a name that is incomplete on its own, as Quasimodo never learns his true birth name. Quasimodo represents both how he knows himself and how the world knows him. The story continues. He is visited by his master or patron, the Justice Minister Frollo. Here, we see more of Quasimodo's education. Frollo refers to Quasimodo in terms like creature and monster and deformed, not casually, but as an aspect of his formal education. Something that he must learn and understand as one, someone with a disability, and two, as an offspring of gypsies. As a person with a disability, I can imagine the psychological harm that must have been inflicted upon him being taught this of himself since birth. Poor self-esteem manifested by the inherent differences that people with disabilities have is already an issue in that community without it being taught directly. Frollo continues with what he calls his alphabet lesson. As a special educator, I thought this part of the film was interesting. Interesting because of the remedial nature of his lesson and the indoctrination of his lesson. Firstly, according to the movie, at this time, Quasimodo is 20 years old. At this point in his education, he should be far beyond the needs for a review of the alphabet. He should be an avid reader. The cathedral where he lives were the primary houses of books during the time the story was set. Furthermore, the words that he was instructed to associate with each particular letter of the alphabet represented a type of indoctrination. Quasimodo rehearsed words like damnation and abomination, words that Frollo believes that Quasimodo should believe about the world and about himself. In education, because of the challenges that disability presents, students with disabilities are often underserved by educators that don't challenge them or expect much of them. This often leads them to be undereducated with materials that are below their intellectual acuity, often teaching them lessons based on their perceptions of that student, maybe that they aren't good enough or that they need help, more help than they actually need, instead of empowering them to do things on their own. Quasimodo is 20 years old. He should be reading books, and if no other, he should be reading the Bible. We move on to the Feast of Fools, a festival hosted by the gypsies of the city. In the narrative, the Feast of Fools is spoken about not merely as an annual festival for the poor, but as a potential place to learn.
Have you ever attended a peasant festival, Captain?
Not recently, sir.
Then this should be quite an education for you.
A place that can provide some sort of education for Quasi and even for Phoebus. So the question is, what are the lessons that we can learn from the Feast of Fools? The Feast of Fools is established to be a time when things are turned upside down, a topsy-turvy day. During this time, monsters are men, people are walked by dogs, and fools can be kings. Despite how spectacular this day appeared, the lesson that Quasimodo and Phoebus learn is the cruelty of man, as Quasimodo is chosen as the king of fools, a title given to the most monstrous or grotesque man in the festival. The previous king of fools is shown for a brief moment as a slothful, disgusting man and possibly coded as having a disability himself. Quasimodo's deformity was believed to be a mask, but it was revealed to be his very flesh. Once crowned in short order, he is pelted with food and tied down as a beast while being called dehumanizing names. Frollo watches on in retribution. The way he is treated is horrifying. This dehumanization continues until Esmeralda stops the cruelty. Eventually, Frollo commands his soldiers to capture Esmeralda, someone for which Frollo learns he has a physical desire. Yet, in Esmeralda's exhibition, rebellion, and eventual escape, Quasimodo learns two more things. First of which, Quasimodo learns romantic desire. He is awakened to desire and romance when he meets Esmeralda, someone he refers to in the terms of heaven's light in a song later on in the movie. He wonders if he, as deformed as he is, can have something as beautiful as Esmeralda in his life. The second thing he learns is something that I thought was interesting again as a special educator, a lesson that Quasimodo didn't catch in the moment. Esmeralda begins to refer to him as boy.
You mistreat this poor boy the same way you mistreat my people.
The reason why this is interesting to me is because infantilization is a common response to people with disabilities. People treat them with kid gloves, no matter how old they are. Quasimodo is 20 years old and he is still being referred to as a boy by Esmeralda and even Frollo. Quasi is a grown man. The real-life ramifications of this is that people with disabilities aren't allowed to be as independent as they could be, form the mature social relationships that they could, and, in the case of their upbringing again, sometimes aren't educated in a way that acknowledges their potential. In this instance, Quasi should have recognized that a woman that thinks of him as a boy isn't one that would also be interested in him romantically, despite how close in age they actually are. Now, considering how isolated he is, this is no surprise. Later on, Quasimodo meets Esmeralda again when she finds sanctuary in Notre Dame Cathedral and after one of the most moving songs in the Disney canon. Quasi helps her escape, but in their conversations, we learn a little bit more about Quasi's education. He essentially tells Esmeralda, verbatim, that gypsies are evil and that he is a monster. I think this is important to point out because a lot of people with disabilities have negative self-perceptions surrounding their disabilities. Often these self-perceptions come from things that were told to them by their parents, about their limitations, by peers in teasing, or by other adults. It is also believable that based upon his worldview, that it would be easy for him to accept that other people, namely gypsies, are also evil and unworthy of compassion when he feels so poorly about who he is. Quasi goes on to sing a song about heaven's light, i.e. Esmeralda. There's a positive song of the gargoyles later on that is interesting narratively. If the gargoyles are only part of Quasi's imagination, then their song could be interpreted as the part of himself that produces self-confidence or esteem, as the song is about a lesson in Quasi being worth it or good. Either way, it's a meaningful song. People like Quasi, people with disabilities, often struggle with self-esteem. It is good to see that metaphorically his self-esteem is coming from within in the scene. Later on, Quasi is captured and he is chained to stone pillars, just more metaphor for his isolation and monstrosity. As the movie reaches its climax, you see the destructive notions of the church kind of get dismantled. Quasi learned, growing up, that the church was a sanctuary and a place of refuge under God. But he also was taught by Frollo that religion was that which categorically makes him a monster, and gypsies dark and evil creatures. In this scene, he reconciles that lesson as a false doctrine, extending the notion of sanctuary to both himself and to Esmeralda. We finally end when Frollo is defeated. We see the conclusion of this story, and spoiler alert, Quasi doesn't get the girl. It's bittersweet, but Quasi learns an important lesson. Friendship, in many ways, is more important than romance, and accepting the feelings of others is an important lesson for him to learn at this time in his life. He was isolated from the world for his entire life. He had no true friends, only caretakers. It would have been wrong for him to force a relationship that wasn't meant to be with a girl that saw him as a boy at the beginning of the story. Someone lost, and not a man. They all deserved better. And frankly, finding someone who will acknowledge you as a friend is an important first step to self-actualization. For many people. In general. So that's a special educator's reaction to Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was a good film with good characterization. And to see a movie about a character with this type of disability in many ways is more meaningful than the various types of images that our modern media currently allows us to see.